following paid commercial program is brought to you by TD Wealth.
Welcome to Money Talk. I'm Kim Parley. Thanks so much for joining us. Coming up on today's show, if you own a business and want to pass it on to your kids, some important potential tax changes you might need to know about, and an organization that brings financial empowerment to in-need communities with a campaign called Unmet. But how you can help will be what we'll be looking at. But first, whether it will be economic uncertainty or bank fears, there's no shortage of potentially bearish headwinds fueling uncertainty in these markets. But that hasn't exactly led to a bearish performance. Take a look at this. Here's a look at the TSX, up just shy of 7%, and the S&P 500 just shy of 10.5%. So where exactly is this sentiment coming from? For more, we're joined by Michael O'Brien. He's portfolio manager at TD Asset Management. Nice to have you join us. Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on.
Okay, so headlines, if you look at them, everything's terrible. Markets, which we just looked at, they're kind of shrugging it off. What's happening?
Well, I mean, that might be a big part of it right there is everybody is pretty bearish. Everybody's pretty bearish coming into the year.
Yep.
And you know the old adage, the market climbs a wall of worry. So there's lots to worry about. So I think one of the explanations is simply positioning. Everybody was cautious. Everybody still is cautious, and the market just likes to stick that in our face sometimes.
Yeah.
I think more tangible reasons in terms of what's been driving the optimism. Obviously, one of the things investors are desperate to see is for the central banks to go to the sidelines. For the central banks to go to the sidelines, you need to see inflation come back down. And so, to be fair, we've seen some pretty decent progress so far this year. You know, we had an inflation report last week here in Canada that was pretty optimistic, well off our highs. Ditto for the U.S., inflation is coming down. The problem is investors, in my opinion, seem to be trying to move too quickly to discount this. It's a long way. So the good news is we've gone from 8% to 4% in inflation. But as the Bank of Canada said last week, it's going from 4 to 2 that's the really tough part. Yeah. And yet investors are kind of hoping and wishing and positioning for that moment where the central banks move to the sidelines and actually start reducing interest rates. Personally, I think they're getting ahead of themselves. I think that's much further off in the future than you would believe if you look at how the market's performed so far this year.
That's interesting, yeah. It's an impatient market. We expect everything now, and some things might be taking a little longer, to your point. Yep. Banking sector, of course, has been fueling a lot of uncertainty, especially in the U.S., especially the smaller U.S. lenders. What's the implication, do you think, on the Canadian side?
So I think the short answer here is the specific issues that have really got people concerned south of the border with the smaller U.S. regionals revolve around stability of their deposit bases. Yeah. If you look at the Canadian situation, very, very different. I'm not concerned about the stability of our deposits. We actually have public data through the end of February where deposits in Canada among the big six are still growing. So I think that concern isn't applicable. What we have seen the last couple days here, obviously, with bank earnings season starting, we've seen a mix of small and large U.S. banks report. So J.P. Morgan and Bank of America on the top end, with a number of regionals sort of in the smaller end. My guess is when the Canadian banks start to report in about a month later in May, their numbers are going to look a lot more like what we've seen out of the J.P. Morgans and the Bank of Americas, as opposed to some of the regional banks, which are showing some stress.
Interesting. With all this in mind, I believe, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, you can tell me if this is true, but you believe people should be taking a cautious approach right now to the markets. Yeah,
going back to the first part of the conversation, I think the real key question here is how sticky is inflation going to be? Yeah. And the stickier inflation is, the longer the central banks have to keep restraining the economy, restraining financial conditions. And so if you look at leadership this year, it's actually been concentrated in things like gold, technology stocks, things like Bitcoin, which typically do really well when central banks are loosening conditions, when liquidity is coming into the market. Yeah. So I think we're at odds here. So I'd be a little careful. I don't know that we're getting rewarded for taking a lot of for being too aggressive in our positioning right now in equity. So I'm trying to bide my time, trying to be patient, and focus on other areas of the market than sort of what's been the front page stories.
Which has served you well. If you talk about specific names that you find are interesting right now, I know you've got three that you brought to talk about. The first one's Dollarama.
Yeah, this would fall into the bucket, and I think all three of them are kind of symptomatic or good examples of what, how I'm feeling about the market right now, which is focus on the areas of the market where you see really good quality companies, where I have a lot of confidence that they will deliver the goods operationally. I don't think this is the time to take a flyer on some names where you're not quite, you don't have that same level of trust. So Dollarama, they just reported last week, super results, very sturdy operators, and they occupy such a unique space in the Canadian retail landscape, that value retail proposition.
Yeah.
So it's one of those names. They haven't done much this year as people have been busy buying other stuff, other stocks. So, it's the type of name that I like to circle around when people are looking elsewhere. Nice, reliable name.
It's up 14%, though, on a full-year basis anyway.
On a full year,
so,
yes, absolutely.
Intact Financial, IFC.
Yep, so another example of a very high-quality company, and maybe what I would describe as a little bit lower beta within the financial space, property and casualty insurance. So not quite as high drama as what we're seeing out of the banks, and also, some of the life insurers. So again, it's another one of these nice, steady, high-quality names. The same management team's been running it for years, doing a phenomenal job. Again, off to a pretty slow relative start this year. Another name that we're happy to add to.
And last one are the rails, which is interesting, CN and CP Rail.
Yeah, these, and I would say this is more of a, through the cycle look. Again, some of the higher quality companies, higher quality businesses that we've got in Canada and the Canadian market. CN Rail, really nice turnaround happening there. Their new CEO and their new COO have done a really nice job, getting them back on track, so to speak. Whereas CP Rail, it's a really interesting juncture here. Just last week, they closed an acquisition to buy Kansas City Southern.
Yep.
This is a real transformational acquisition. And when you look at CP and Kansas City Southern, the combined network, it's really going to open up a lot of doors for this company.
Very interesting. Mike, it's always great having you on. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks for having me.
Mike O'Brien with TD Asset Management. Reminder, always do your own research to find out what works for you. And if you liked the questions that I asked, great. If you didn't, guess what? You can ask Mike your own questions because he appears on a midday daily show called Money Talk Live, which airs weekdays at noon on TD's web broker platform, hosted by none other than Greg Bunnell. And there's a look at some of the people we have coming up this week, and we'll have Mike on there again really soon. All right, stay with us. On this show, the latest federal budget included some proposed changes to the tax rules when passing the family business onto your kids. Pierre Letourneau of TD Wealth goes over the details. You're watching Money Talk. We'll be right back.